The inconclusive results of Michelle's past life regression do not shake my basic belief in hypnosis as a tool for psychological healing. Whether or not it offers us definitive proof of previous lifetimes is another matter. However, in this particular case, all other explanations seem to be even more wanting.
Hello, and welcome to Discovering the X-Files, the podcast in which a newbie, that's me, takes a deep dive into the entirety of Chris Carter's creepy universe, as longtime fans escort me on the journey, a journey filled with paranoid conspiracies and monsters of the week. I'm Erix Antoine, and today Daniel and I will be discussing Born Again, which originally aired in the US on April 29th, 1994. It was written by Alex Ganza and Howard Gordon, and directed by Gerald Friedman. In this episode, Mulder and Scully investigate the mysterious apparent suicide of a police officer in upstate New York. It appears a young girl who witnessed the event might be the reincarnation of another officer, murdered years earlier. It's a Monster of the Week episode with a rather familiar, at least by this point, X-Files plot. And after the break, Daniel and I are going to get into it, so stick around.
Michelle is 8 years old. That means she was conceived at roughly the same time that Officer Morris was killed.
Do me a favor, Mulder, let me say it. Reincarnation.
Metempsychosis, transmigration, re-embodiment, call it what you will.
Oh, based on the coincidence that Michelle Bishop and Officer Morris both practice the obscure art of paper folding?
What about the composite drawing and the dolls and the fact that Michelle was witness to 2 deaths that can be tied to Charlie Morris?
So what, you think he's back like Peter Proud to avenge his murder?
It's not so far-fetched, Scully. Reincarnation is a basic tenet of many major religions.
That still doesn't explain how an 8-year-old girl can kill 2 grown men.
Well, individuals with strong past life memories often exhibit enhanced psychic abilities, ESP, telekinesis.
So where does that leave us?
One short step away from proving the pre-existence of the human soul.
The creepy kid trope, here we go again. I think like that's, like off the bat, what I'll say is that I do enjoy that this does rely on the very, this does fall back on the very reliable horror movie trope, which is the creepy kid trope, which they've already employed in previous episodes, but you know, it is once again employed to full effect. But yeah, I mean, we'll just come out and say it. Basically, I mean, this episode was written by Howard Gordon and Alex Ganza, who also wrote Shadows, and it's basically like, you know how last episode was Tombs, which felt like a sequel, you know, like you had Squeeze, and then you have a sequel, and it has the feeling of a horror sequel. And this also feels like a sequel, you know. It feels like taking Shadows 2 and then just like sort of, I mean, I don't know if you felt the same way. I don't know if it reminded you of Shadows, but it certainly reminded me of Shadows. Yeah, almost from the get-go.
Yeah, it's like a less overstuffed companion piece.
Almost like Shadows was like a proof of concept.
Mm-hmm.
Like, here is Shadows, in my opinion. Okay, so if you're going to do a story like that, here's how you do it. Like, here you go. This is a meat and potatoes, quote unquote, story. You know, this is just a basic sort of ghost story, revenge story, and it's straightforward. And it also involves a, you know, murder, a conspiracy, a murder conspiracy. And it's the same basic, it's a ghost seeking revenge or seeking justice for his murder, also through a female, in this case, a little girl.
True, yeah.
And also using telekinesis or basically just telekinesis to accomplish his revenge. And so, yeah, I was like, yeah, this is Shadows. This is Shadows through and through. This time done well. Although reportedly the people behind the episode were not pleased with it.
Really?
Yeah, reportedly, like Howard Gordon was not happy with it. I guess he felt it didn't come out very well, and David Duchovny, apparently, this is taken from the internet. David Duchovny, quote, detested this episode, and so like I'm trying to figure out what it is. I mean, I think in Howard Gordon's case, it's something about how he did pick up on the fact that it was essentially a retread of stuff they'd already done, and which sure it's true. I mean, it is Shadows. It's also a little bit of Eve. I mean, there's a little bit of that too. Like they'd covered this ground already in other episodes, and so I could understand them saying, we're kind of going through the motions here. At the same time, you're like, well, it's episode 22, or that's kind of what happens when you're.
It's gonna happen. I mean, especially with a show. Not. I mean, it's still a pretty broad premise, but there's still a lot of room there for repetition. So yeah, I mean, it was bound to happen eventually, and the fact that it happened with the same writers, I guess, isn't too surprising.
Yeah, it's almost like, and it does, like, it feels like Shadows would have been a proof of concept. It's almost like, that episode we did called Shadows, and to be honest, it kind of sucked. So maybe we do that story again, but just do it better. It's almost like an unconscious thing. Like, here's what we should have done the first time. Let's just do it again. Well, we can get into that in a minute. I want to like take some things out first. I think so. This episode takes place in Buffalo, New York, and that to me, as a native New Yorker, of course, Buffalo's upstate, and I'm from the city, but it's still funny to me whenever these just funny, like a television series shot in Vancouver, probably using local actors for many of the smaller parts, and set in Buffalo, New York, and I love how they're all trying to do the sort of New York cop thing to it, even though it's Buffalo, it's not, they're not in Brooklyn, this is Buffalo. Like let's ease up on the New York cliche, like the New York cop cliche. I don't know how much I buy the premise that, because the conspiracy revolves around a 10-year-old case. It's about 10 years in the past. Well, it's less than 10 years. It's 8 years in the past. And we're never clear exactly. It's something to do with a bribe. It's some kind of a bribery, and a guy ends up dead, and they stage it to look like he was murdered by the Chinese triads.
Yeah, I think that's gouged out his eye and chopped off an arm.
Right, exactly. They actually drowned him, but then they staged it to seem like a gangland killing, like a retaliation. And I go, in Buffalo? Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know to what degree I buy that. I don't know to what degree I buy that it would be credible for, the Chinese triad wanting revenge on a police officer who works out of a precinct in Buffalo. Like that's the part where I'm saying, I don't know about that. I'm not, I mean, maybe, maybe somebody bought it clearly for 8 years.
I've only been to New York City once, and I've also driven through New York State as a whole twice, I think. But even I know that that's a bit odd for Buffalo.
Yeah, it's a bit odd. It's a bit odd. Janice from Friends shows up. And it's one of the rare times, perhaps that I can remember in recent years, at least of anything I've watched, that I've actually seen her just sort of be just like a normal character. Like it's not. They're not playing up the cartoony voice or anything like that. She's just sort of. The actress's name is Maggie Wheeler, and she was apparently dating Duchovny.
Oh yeah.
At the time of this episode, yeah. Maybe that's why he detests it. Maybe it brings back, maybe it's like, that's the episode I did with my girlfriend at the time, and whatever, that didn't work out very well, and so now whenever I see that episode, I just remember those times, or like maybe that's why he detests it. Because I'm trying to get to the heart of what it is about this episode that I don't like much. I mean, I think it's generally an entertaining episode, and it is definitely a better episode than Shadows.
Yeah.
I'll say that right off the bat. Some of the problems in it, I guess, it has that sort of tone. It feels like I'm watching a police procedural. It feels more like a cop show.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's this element to it where like there's some scenes in it that just feel weird. Like when Tony Fiore, who's the one of the cops who was involved in the killing of Charlie Morris, when he goes to see the former cop who's now was it an insurance agent or something?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he goes to see him, it's like, oh, the FBI came to see me, and that whole scene where they're like in that office, the set, the way they're like sort of tensely talking to each other, I don't know, it just felt like I was watching Law and Order, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it really does.
It's just like, we said we'd wait 10 years. I don't know. It was just like, this doesn't feel like the X-Files for a minute. Like, I'm just like, what? It feels like a different show.
If you were to yank the whole child possessed by the spirit of a murdered cop aspect out of it, it completely plays like a Law and Order episode. You've got this decade-old conspiracy between these dirty cops. They killed their one honest friend and made it look like a hit job. And then the one married his widow. Like, it's just chock full of classic TV cop tropes. And yeah, you're right. That one scene really is the whole button on the whole thing. Like, it feels like it would fit in any Dick Wolf procedural.
Again, not that I was disliking it. I was
entertained.
No, it's fine, by what I was watching. It just feels out of place. It just feels out of place. And that leads. And just before I forget, there's a quote from Chris Carter where he like no it's a decent. I mean he here's what he thought of the episode. I thought the direction was a little sloppy, but it's one of those episodes that plays a little closer to reality, and I like that about it. I guess he's referring to like the tone of it, precisely what we say. And then he goes, "There's a nice twist in it about a man marrying the wife of another man he had killed." There were actually some nice effects, just not one of my favorites. All right, so the thing is, like, yeah, okay, like I kind of agree with him. I think that it's like a well-constructed story. Like, first of all, if you take the supernatural aspect out of it, that whole story of like corrupt cops and all of that going on, and the guy ends up marrying the dead cop's wife and all of that. Yeah, that's like something out of a Dick Wolf procedural, as you said. Now you add in the supernatural element, and it still can be kind of an interesting thing. It's got some interesting details, and I agree. I do think the effects, again, it uses minimalist sort of effects, and so the death scenes are kind of cool. The guy that gets choked on the bus, like that's like a cool sequence. It's like well done. It's executed in a way that's well done, and the finale is good. I mean, it's legitimately impressive. All the not pyrotechnics so much, but just a lot of stuff exploding around the house. Even if it doesn't really make sense, like what, I mean, I'll say I did laugh. I couldn't help it. It got a real big like guffaw out of me when so little girl's standing there like making shit fly around the room. Tony Fiore's like, whatever he's saying, we didn't know or whatever. And so first it's a fireplace poker, right? Like that flies across the room, whacks him in the face. And then he sort of like comes down to his knees, and then like I was like, oh, that's cool. But then it's like a flower vase, or just like a vase that like hits him right in the back of the head when he's like right in the back of the head when he's kneeling down in pain, and that just got a huge laugh out of me. I don't know why. I just like
it's very Looney Tunes.
Yeah, it's like, oh, and on top of that, I'm gonna throw a face at your face too. It's a Kersmash. So like thinking about the episode, and then this kind of relates to Shadows also, because obviously it brought to mind, I think I have a problem with, let me see how I can phrase this. So the X-Files, I think, is at its best when it touches on, let's say, paranormal things or certain unexplained phenomena or whatever, but it usually tends to come at it from an angle where it feels grounded. Mm-hmm. It feels grounded in a credible scientific concept, or at least just a credible concept in general. Like, even if it's something as out there as werewolves, right?
Yeah.
There's an aspect to it that you go like, okay, well, maybe, it's the occult, but like, maybe, it's, if you're going to be talking about the Sasquatch or the Jersey Devil or werewolves, that's kind of far-fetched, but you're still sort of grounding it in true myth. For whatever reason, though, I don't think it really works when you're talking about ghosts.
I think that there's some things that they do better than others in both episodes. Like, for instance, the attempted murder in Shadows, when the two, the hitman and the hit woman show up.
Mm-hmm.
Flicks his switchblade and says, "All right, start the bath."
Right.
When they're getting thrown around the room, it doesn't work as much. Or the slapping. That's very Sam Raimi. It's very Looney Tunes-ish. But then you get that shot of Mulder walking in and the guy's just being held up in the air and being choked. That beat works. It's the I think they get too carried away with throwing things around or smacking or slapping people around with the movement of it all, and it just amps it up a bit too much beyond the general like vibe and atmosphere of the show. It just takes it a step too far with that stuff. Their ghost moments are better when they're being creepy than when they're pulling a poltergeist and shit's flying all around the room.
Right. Okay. There's that aspect to it, I guess. The execution of it may be stretching credibility, like going into a cartoonish extreme. Yeah. But I also think that the concept of, ghosts feels more metaphysical to me than scientific.
True. Yeah.
In the case of Shadows, it's just a straight up ghost, right? Here, they're already touching upon something else. Here, they're touching on reincarnation. So they're getting into like an aspect of spirituality, and I think that to me feels a little out of place because earlier you referred to it as that little, what's her name, Michelle? That's her name, right? Was it Michelle, the little girl?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, but the little girl, right? It's not so much that she's possessed by Charlie Morris. She is Charlie Morris, right? Isn't that the concept? Now, or correct me if I'm wrong, maybe not, because at the end, presumably once his death has been avenged, once justice has been served, presumably the girl's totally fine, totally normal.
Yeah.
Has
That's the weird part. That's the part that doesn't make any sense. So they present it all throughout like she is the reincarnation of him, full stop, out for revenge. I guess it's been long enough now, and she's old enough now that she can maneuver around the city without needing too much help.
Mm-hmm.
But then you turn around and have that bit at the end where, the mother has the big speech about how she's never really been a normal child. So clearly, even before this vendetta against the former partners happened, the kid was off. But then she's a perfectly normal little girl at the end. So are we to believe that the spirit was just inside her the entire time and the dominant force controlling her life, and then it left her after its mission was done? Or is she still the cop but no longer has the worry and is just decided to live life all over again? Like, they never really explain their outlook on that, if that makes any sense.
Well, sure, and I think that also fits in with the tone of the series.
Yeah.
I mean, it's better to leave it ambiguous because that way, you don't need to explain it, right? And you just sort of you let people decide what they want to believe. Do they want it to be possession or do they want it to be reincarnation? And since the spirit has already fulfilled his mission, he can lie dormant. He'll exist in the girl's dreams or whatever. Like, it doesn't really. I mean, however you want to look at it.
I guess you could have had a death wish moment at the end with her spotting another dirty cop from across the street and then the little finger gun at him.
Well, that would have been a cool ending. Instead we linger on Mulder going like, oh, this case is unexplained, and his face is, I detest this episode. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what it kind of boils down to for me. I think that I find it a little bit harder to completely buy into the concept of ghosts in the X-Files. maybe this will change, and I'm assuming that maybe there will be future episodes that also delve into the paranormal. I can imagine. I mean, we've got whatever it is, 8 seasons of this thing, so I'd be surprised if there weren't a few more down the line. But I'm just saying that concept, I'm having a hard time seeing it as something that fits. That could change, obviously, but right now, because everything else doesn't revolve around that, like everything else, it seems to be more grounded in something that they can explain scientifically. Like they can have some kind of a scientific explanation for it, whether it's a mutation like tombs or aliens or whatever it may be, right? There is something that tangible, okay, that you can kind of grab onto when looking at the concept. And that seems to be the case for everything, with the exception of Shadows and now Born Again. So that's where, I think they run into an obstacle there from a storytelling standpoint. I can only imagine that as they start to polish the series and explore this concept further, maybe they start finding ways to do that, to make it more tangible.
Yeah, I think that's the big problem. They found numerous ways to work in all kinds of different mythological and urban legends and conspiracy theories and make it fit the overall tone and style of the series. But in terms of ghosts, at least at this point, they just haven't quite figured out the perfect approach for it yet. They're just kind of feeling around the edges and still stumbling a little bit.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I mean, if you had told me that Glenn Morgan and James Wong did like a polish on this, it would not have surprised me, since the death scenes are very much in the tradition of Final Destination.
True. I wouldn't be surprised if they had either.
I mean, because maybe that famous spec script already existed. Who knows? And so like, it's just weird because like especially the climax. When the cable comes off the wall and wraps itself around his legs, and I was like, this is straight up Final Destination. No, not only that, the guy with actually forget that one, the scarf
bus.
and the bus. That's straight up Final Destination.
Oh yeah,
that's
all
like,
the way.
oh yeah, this is the guy trying to get off the bus and oops, like because it always is like this absurd accident that just. So I was just like, yeah, I mean, of course, in Final Destination, he probably would have been decapitated. But
naturally,
yeah, blood would have splattered all over like the thing. But yeah, like that's what it brought to mind. Yeah, I mean, so let's see, what else can we say about this episode? Is there anything we haven't really brought up?
One thing I thought the little girl looked familiar, and when I looked up what she's done since, I didn't really come across much of anything that I've seen. But a fun little note, of course, she's a child actress playing someone inhabited or completely being an adult in this episode, and then as an adult now she voices Pinkie Pie and Fluttershy on the current My Little Pony cartoon series.
Oh,
she's kind of running the gamut there.
Yeah, she became a voice actress.
It looks that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, speaking of familiar, yeah. Apart from apart from Maggie Wheeler, yeah, I didn't really recognize anybody else.
No.
I would not be surprised if they all were veterans of cop shows from the period. Yeah, whether it's Dick Wolf or Spencer for Hire or whatever. But I'm pretty sure that these guys showed up because they clearly, that's the wheelhouse that they're in. But yeah, I mean, apart from that, I don't know. I mean, I guess this is not obviously this is not one of the classic episodes.
No.
Obviously, this is just one of those it's just sort of there. The one thing that I did want to mention, I don't know if you picked up on this or maybe I'm imagining things, but it seemed to me that this is the first time where Mulder gets actively frustrated, or at least flustered, with Scully's skepticism.
Yeah.
There's a scene there. He just sort of, he lets her have it at one point. It's just, yeah. And I thought that was an interesting, because I don't remember him ever getting that aggressive, and it almost seems like, yeah, here we are 22 episodes in, and it almost seems like it almost seems deliberate. It's like, yes, this is kind of frustrating that you cannot accept the possibility of the paranormal after the past 21 adventures that we've had. It's like he almost seems to be an audience surrogate in that scene where it's just like, what the fuck? Like, and that is, I mean, think about it. So Scully, by the end of this episode, she walks in to the house, she sees the entire living room of this house getting demolished by unseen forces. This little girl standing there, and we end, of course, with the very spectacular explosion of the fish tank.
Yeah.
And so I go, okay, I think by the end of this, you must accept that the theory about what was going on is 100% correct, Scully. And, unfortunately, we don't get that. I don't think we ever, well, maybe eventually we do, but at this point, we still never get that moment of her going, well, maybe you had a point. Like, we never get that. Like, it still doesn't happen, and yet she sees it, she experiences it.
Yeah, they do kind of play with that a little bit in the episode as well, because early on he tosses out his telekinesis theory, check and see if there's an electrical shock wound on the body when you're doing the autopsy. And then, of course, she finds it, lets out a deep sigh, and rolls her eyes because she knows. I'm sure she's standing there picturing the look on his face when she has to tell him that he was right.
Right, exactly. Like, okay, so there was something to what he was saying. and that's the thing about it. I think it's like she's like stubbornly skeptical.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It almost becomes, I mean, yes, of course it's to some degree it's a character flaw, but it becomes this personality quirk where she just refuses to let go of her skepticism ever, even when she's like confronted with it very clearly. And I don't know if I can call that necessarily a writing flaw. Where they're stretching it to let the character never really change. They're kind of boxing her into this, not allowing her to grow beyond the skepticism, and maybe that's a flaw. But I can only imagine that as the show goes on, she will evolve, at least to some degree.
Yeah. One thing I hadn't really thought about until watching it this time is, of course, immediately before this, we get the whole Skinner and everyone are cracking down. The magnifying glass is on Mulder and Scully now more than ever. One false move and they're going to shut I don't know if you could call it a department since it's only two people, but they're going to shut the department down. And I think that adds to why Mulder has his blow up, why Scully is being a little bit more combative with him. She even calls him out on untraditional investigative techniques again in the episode after having the entire reading the riot act to him in the previous one. So it even though this is a standalone, it feels like the pressure from that meeting with Skinner or the meetings with Skinner in the last episode it's really starting to build and affect both of them, even though the episode doesn't directly state it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess if you want to put it into a certain continuity, it would make sense that after their experience in the previous episode, there's added tension, and so
stress. Yeah.
I mean, I think that could make sense, and it would account for their behavior in that sense, because they are especially at odds in this one episode, and I just thought that was an interesting. It was just an interesting detail. It kind of jumped out at me when he kind of blows up on her there. I was like, whoa! So he finally lost his patience. He finally was like, all right, enough of this, and you can see him like wanting to shake her,
Well, and then not long after that, you have him trying to have that talk with the child psychologist who is just not having any of his theories whatsoever.
Basically, she's like, asks him, are you talking about reincarnation? And he doesn't, he just kind of looks at her and she's like, okay, I've actually got another appointment now, so
can you please leave?
I think I've given you enough of my time. It's it's pretty wild. I did that was the thing. At first I was like, okay, obviously the reason it took this long for the ghost of Charlie Morris to start acting was because he was waiting for the little girl to sort of be old enough to get around on her own in some way, right? And so that makes sense. Okay, she's 8 years old. Okay, now it's easier to control her, whatever. And then the one detail that wasn't too clear, something about a sum of money that's in a safe deposit box at Citibank specifically, at a branch of Citibank in Buffalo, New York, and that money is what? Like whatever, is that the bribe money? I guess
some sort of big payout.
Right, and it's like we said we'd wait 10 years. That seems like a really arbitrary kind of thing.
Yeah, they're never really specific. I mean, I guess you could come up with any generic cop show reason for the money. Maybe they found it on a drug bust. Maybe they were paid off by somebody. Maybe they robbed somebody. It's just hard to say.
Right, because basically that's the concept, right? I mean, Charlie Morris refused to take the bribe, refused to take the payoff. I mean, I'm guessing that's his cut. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
I guess that's his cut of whatever this was, and that he refused to take, and they killed him for it. It's like we were just going to scare him, or we were just going to show him what's what, and so you accidentally drown him in the fish tank.
Whoopsie.
I think that's really all we can say about this episode. It is this is a meat and potatoes episode. it is not necessarily, though, it is better than Shadows. I can say that the concept, at least, it's tighter than Shadows.
Yeah.
It just has this one compelling story at its center that you follow along. It has some cool effects. It's perfectly fine. It's perfectly watchable.
Yeah, that's where I fall on it. It's just a perfectly fine filler episode.
Scully, you saw what happened in there.
What I saw was some traumatized little girl who, for no apparent reason, has some connection to Charlie Morris.
All evidence suggests that Michelle Bishop is Charlie Morris.
Mulder.
Short of her growing a mustache, how much more apparent does it have to become for you to accept it?
Okay. Let's just say that by some small miracle, you managed to convince Michelle's mother, and the next hypno-regression provides you with everything you could possibly hope for. No grand jury is going to listen to that kind of testimony. We still will not have an actionable case.
And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. And if you did, please subscribe to the podcast, give us a like, take a minute to write a positive review, and go ahead and spread the word on social media. The podcast is available on Anchor FM, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. Look for the Erix Antoine Network on Facebook or on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at ErixAntoineNet, and check out my film reviews on Letterboxd. You should also check out Daniel Baldwin's website, theschlocketeer.com, and follow him on Twitter at Daniel W. Baldwin. I'm Erix Antoine. I'll be back in a few days to talk about the episode Roland, which has nothing to do with the Dark Tower and much less to do with professional sound equipment of any kind, though a certain element of the plot does involve shredding of a certain kind. A friend of the podcast and fellow X-Files fan will be sitting down with me to talk about that. And I hope you'll join us. Until then, let's all remember that the truth is out there. See you next time.